Hare Krishna. Please accept my full obeisances. So we'll continue our discussion from chapter 13 and verses 6 and 7. Mahabhutani ahankaro buddhiravyaktamev cha indriyani doshekam cha panchachendriya gocharaha ichha dvesha sukham dukham sanghatas chetana dhriti etad kshetram samasena savikaram udharatam. The five great elements: false ego, intelligence, the unmanifested, the 10 senses and the mind, the 5 sense objects, desire, hatred, happiness, distress, the aggregate, the life symptoms, and convictions. All these are considered, in summary, to be the field of activities and its interactions. So, as Krishna had promised that he would now explain more about Kshetra. In the third verse, he had given a brief explanation of Kshetra. Now, he is giving a more analytical composition of the Kshetra. So, what are the elements that constitute the Kshetra? So, Krishna first says that it is avyakta. So, avyakta refers to pradhan. So, pradhan is the original state of material creation. When this material world is in its most primordial stage, it is essentially a homogeneous primordial soup in which nothing is distinguished. All the modes are mixed over there, all the elements are mixed over there, but none of them exist independently. And that state is essentially in equilibrium because there is no activity happening there. So that is pradhan. Then the second is buddhi, which refers to mahatattva, which is the transformation of pradhan into a distinguished state. And here the elements have now begun to separate from one another. From the mahatattva comes ahankar, which is false ego. And false ego is the one which is essentially the deluding potency of the Lord that gives the soul a false sense of identity. That is ahankar. So we have the 3 subtle transformations from pradhan, which is the undistinguished, homogeneous primordial soup, comes mahatattva, in which the ingredients are now being segregated. To comes ahankar, which is the specific conception of misidentification. The fourth, Krishna says, is Mahabhutani. So these are the Panch Mahabhutas, which is earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Then he says Indriya Gochara. So these are the 5 sense objects. These are the sense objects by which these 5 great elements are perceived. So earth is perceived by smell, fire is perceived by form, water by taste, air by touch, and ether by sound. So the 5 sense objects are smell, then seeing, tasting, touching, and sound. Then Krishna says Indriya. So Indriya are the senses by which the sense objects are perceived. So nose perceives the smell that is coming from earth. Eyes perceive the form that is revealed by fire. Tongue, they taste the taste of water. Skin is touching through air. And the ear is hears the sound in ether. Then we have the 5 working senses, which are the hand, feet, anus, genitals, and the voice. And finally, there is the mind, which is considered to be the 11th sense that controls the other 10 senses. So in this way, Krishna has analyzed the kshetra to be comprising of 24 elements. There is the pradhan, there is the mahatattva, there is the ahankar, there is the 5 elements, earth, water, fire, air, ether. There is the 5 sense objects. Then there is the 5 senses, and then there is the 5 working senses, and finally there is the mind. So if you add all of it, we come to 24. So based on Sankhya, if we were to analyze the kshetra or the body, then we understand it is made of these 24 elements. Now one may say that pradhan is transformed to mahatattva and mahatattva is transferred to ahankar. So then how can we say that there is still pradhan? But the understanding is that even though pradhan transforms itself into mahatattva, a portion of the pradhan still remains. And similarly, a portion of mahatattva still remains, and so on. The portion of false ego still remains. So that is why when we looked at our material body, it still contains the pradhan, the mahatattva, and of course the ahankar, etc. So after talking about the composition of the material body of this 24 elements, Krishna then says Sankata, which is, he is talking about what happens when all these things interact with one another. What is the transformation impact of these elements? Because they are not sitting passive in the body. Under the influence of the false ego, the senses are active, perceiving the sense objects, the working senses are active. So, when all these things come together, what happens? So Krishna says that one is that he says Ichha, Dvesha, Sukha, Dukha. The desire, hatred, happiness, and distress. These are the results of the interaction of the elements of the gross body. And Chetana, which is consciousness, which is Dhriti, which is perseverance or conviction. This is a symptom of the subtle element of the body. So when the subtle elements of the body, which is the ahankar, the mana, the buddhi, they all interact with each other, they result in consciousness, chetana. They result in dhriti, perseverance or conviction. And when the other material elements, the 5 senses, the sense objects, they interact with one another, they result in ichha, dvesh, sukha, dukha. So we now have a complete description of the kshetra. That the kshetra is composed of 24 elements, and Krishna gives us the breakdown. There are subtle and gross elements. These 24 elements are interacting with one another. And as a result of this interaction, at a material level, desire, hatred, happiness, and distress is created. And at a subtle level, this living symptoms of chetana and dhriti are created. Okay, moving on to the next verse. The next we have verses 8 through 12. There are 5 verses. अमानित्वम् अदम्भित्वम् अहिंसा क्षान्तिरार्जवम् आचार्योपासनं शौचं स्थैर्यम् आत्मविनिग्रह इन्द्रियार्थेषु वैराग्यम् अहंकार एव च जन्म मृत्यु जरा व्याधि दुख दोषानुदर्शनम् असक्ति अनभिष्वसंघ पुत्रदार ग्रहादिषु नित्यं च समाचितत्वम् स्थाननिष्ठोपपत्तिष्ठु मयि चान्यायोगेन भक्तिरव्यभिचारिणी विविक्तदेशसेवितम् अरतिर्जनसंसदि अध्यात्मज्ञाननित्यत्वं तत्त्वज्ञानार्थदर्शनम् एतज्ज्ञानम् इति प्रोक्तम् अज्ञानं यद् अतोऽन्यथा. Translation: humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age and disease, detachment, freedom from entanglement with children, wife, home and the rest, even-mindedness, amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization, and philosophical search for the absolute truth. All these I declare to be knowledge. And besides this, whatever there may be is ignorance. So in these 5 verses, Krishna is going to be explaining in details about Jnanam. So the third question that Arjuna had asked was about knowledge. And earlier on Krishna had explained briefly that knowledge is understanding the difference between the Kshetra and the Kshetragya, between the field of activities and the knower of the field. Here Krishna is now going to talk about 20 qualities that are used for gaining that knowledge. So let me put up a table of these 20 qualities. So here we see the 20 qualities and the corresponding verse numbers. So the Acharyas have explained that these 20 qualities generally fall in 3 categories. 18 qualities, they come in the category of Jnana Mishra Bhakti. So qualities like humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a guru, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation, absence of false ego, perception of the evil of birth, death, etc., detachment from the object of sense gratification, freedom from entanglement, even-mindedness in pleasant and unpleasant, aspiring to live in a solitary place, and accepting the importance of self-realization. Detachment from the general mass of people. These are all Jnana Mishra Bhakti. There is one quality, the 16th quality, constant and unalloyed devotion to Krishna, that comes in the category of pure devotion, Bhakti. And the last 2 qualities, which is accepting the importance of self-realization and the philosophical search for the absolute truth, these are in the category of Gyan. So, we will now quickly speak about these 20 qualities. So, amanitva or humility means not expecting respect from others. Then adamvita or pridelessness means to not perform activities to become famous. Ahimsa or non-violence means not to give pain to other living entities. Kshanti or tolerance means to tolerate insults. Then arjava or simplicity means to be straightforward even to those who are deceiving you. Acharya upasan or serving the guru means to serve a guru without any motivation. Saucha or cleanliness means to have internal as well as external cleanliness. So external cleanliness is by taking bath and keeping the environment clean. Internal cleanliness is by purification of the mind, by chanting of mantras, by avoiding bad thoughts. Then the eighth quality is thairya or steadiness, which is being steady on the spiritual path. Then the ninth quality is atma vinigraha, which is self-control, restraining the mind from the sense objects, which are obstacles to atma-gyan. Then vairagya indriyartheshu is renunciation, which is the lack of taste for sense objects, which are obstacles. Then ahankar, so it is actually anahankar. Anahankar is absence of false ego, giving up the identification of the body. Dosha anudarshana is the perception of to contemplate the faults of the doshas of this material life, which is repeated birth, death and suffering. Then the 13th quality is ashakti, which is detachment from the objects of sense enjoyment, such as affection for the sons and other family members. Then anha bisvanga is the freedom from entanglement. Essentially, it is the lack of absorption in happiness and distress, even when they are present or absent. Samchita is the 15th quality, which is even-mindedness in pleasant and unpleasant, which means to be the same, sama, without being exuberant in case things are going well for you, or being depressed when things are not. Then avibicharani bhakti, this is the 16th quality, which is the constant and unalloyed devotion to Krishna. So this is the one quality that is in the stage of Shuddha Bhakti. 17 is aspiring to live in a solitary place, essentially lack of attachment to materialistic people or environments. Then Adhyatma is the detachment from the general mass of people. Then 19th is accepting the importance of self-realization. So this is in the category of Gyan. And 20th is conducting a philosophical search for the absolute truth. So these are the 20 qualities that are explained, and these are both qualities that one develops in order to get the knowledge. The knowledge essentially is distinction between the kshetra and the kshetragyas, distinction between the body and the soul, distinction between the soul and the super soul. So that's the knowledge. So these 20 are qualities that one develops in order to acquire that knowledge. And conversely, these are also qualities that manifest as one develops this knowledge. So they are both the cause as well as the symptom. Okay, so we'll move on to the next verse. Verse 13. Geyam yatyat pravakshyame yajgyatvam ashnute anadimat param brahma nasattanashaduchyate. I shall now explain the knowable, knowing which you will taste the eternal Brahman, the spirit, beginningless and subordinate to me, lies beyond the cause and effect of this material world. So Krishna has so far spoken about the Kshetra, right? He spoke about the 24 elements that constitutes the Kshetra. He has spoken about the Kshetragyas briefly. He has spoken about the Jiva and the Paramatma. He has also spoken about knowledge. He said knowledge is the way to distinguish between the Kshetra and the Kshetragyas, and what are the components of knowledge. Now he is speaking about the object of knowledge, because knowledge cannot exist in vacuum. The purpose of knowledge is to reveal something. So what is it that this knowledge reveals? So along with Gyan is Geyam. Along with knowledge is knowable. So Arjuna had also asked this question about what is knowledge and what is to be known. So Krishna is saying that now I will tell you about the knowable. So in this, Krishna is speaking about the Jiva. He said, now I shall speak about the Jiva. Why do we say Jiva? Because he says that the Brahman, the spirit, beginningless and subordinate to me. So the fact that he is referring to this knowable, this object as subordinate to me, means that he is talking now about the spirit. So what does the verse indicate? That the purpose of all this knowledge is to know the spirit or the Jivatma. The Jivatma is composed of it lies beyond the cause and effect of the material world, which means that it is not material. If it is not material, what it is? It is the eternal Brahman, which means that it is the eternal spirit. Now Krishna is also the Brahman. So that is why understanding the difference between the two Kshetragyas is important. That qualitatively the soul and the super soul are the same. Krishna is Satchitanand, the Jiva is Satchitanand. Krishna is eternal, the Jiva is eternal. Qualitatively they are the same. But the difference is that one is dependent on the other. The Jiva is minute and the Lord is infinite. The Jiva is fully dependent and the Lord is fully independent. So, one of the objects of the knowledge is the Jiva. So, let's go to the next verse. Verse 14. Sarvata panipadam tad sarvatokshi shiro mukham sarvata shrutimaloke sarvam avrityate sthati. Everywhere are his hands and legs, his eyes, heads and faces, and he has ears everywhere. In this way, the super soul exists, pervading everything. So while the previous verse spoke about one object of knowledge, which is the Jiva, this verse speaks about the second object of knowledge, which is Paramatma, the super soul or Krishna. So we understand that Gayam, there are two objects of knowledge. One is the Jiva and the second is the Paramatma. So Krishna uses, and this is the way that Upanishads are written, Krishna uses poetry and to describe things that are not very easily understood through simple prose. So he says, everywhere are his hands and legs, his eyes, heads and faces. This is a poetic way of saying that the super soul is everywhere. That in every jiva accompanying the soul is the super soul. In every aspect of material existence, the soul is the super soul is there. This verse is actually very similar to the first verse of Purusha Shukta prayers. Saharsa Sirsa Purusha, Saharsa Aksha, Saharsa Pad, Sabhuming Vishvato Vritva Atyateshtha Dasangulam. It is said that the Purusha, Saharsa Sirsa Purusha, the Purusha has 1,000 heads. Saharsa Aksha, Saharsa Pad, 1,000 eyes and 1,000 feet. Sabhuming Vishvato Vritva, that he encloses the entire creation, and Atyateshtha Dasangulam, and extends beyond it in 10 directions, in all the 10 directions represented by the 10 fingers. So Krishna, Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport that as the sun exists diffusing its unlimited rays, so does the super soul or the personality of Godhead. He exists in his all-pervading form, and in him exist all the individual living entities, beginning from Brahma down to the small ants. There are unlimited heads, legs, hands and eyes, and unlimited living entities. All are existing in and on the super soul. So yet another understanding. One understanding is that the Paramatma has unlimited heads and legs. The other understanding is that the Paramatma is accompanying the jivas who have unlimited heads and legs. But essentially, the metaphors are pointing to the same thing, which is the all pervasiveness of the super soul. So we understand now that there are two objects of knowledge, the soul and the super soul. So we see that there is a recurrence of the entities. Earlier we have said that there are two kshetragyas, which is the soul and the super soul. Now we are saying there are two gayams, the soul and the super soul. So the knowers of the kshetra are also the object of knowledge. Right? So points to the importance of self-realization. Okay, let's go to the next verse. Verse 15. Sarvendriya gunabhasham sarvendriya vivarjitam asaktam savabhritcheva nirgunam gunabhoktracha. The super soul is the original source of all senses, yet he is without senses. He is unattached, although he is the maintainer of all living beings. He transcends the modes of nature, and at the same time he is the master of all the modes of material nature. So previous verse had introduced us to the Paramatma as the object of knowledge. This verse gives us some more understanding of the nature of the Paramatma. And the verse again we see it speaks in apparent contradictions. That the super soul is the origin of the senses but without senses. He is unattached but the maintainer of all the modes. He is the master of the modes, but he is not affected by the modes. So again, this way of speaking in so-called riddles is typical of the Vedanta Sutras, typical of the Upanishads. One of the reasons that they speak in this way is that they force the reader to take shelter of a spiritual master who can then explain things as it is. So that's one reason they speak in apparent riddles, to make it difficult for somebody who is either approaching it in a challenging mode. So when they read this, they get confused and go away, or somebody is casually approaching it, because these are serious topics. It is essentially forcing one to take shelter of a qualified guru who can speak about resolve these apparent contradictions. So how does Srila Prabhupada help us understand this? He makes a few points. One is that when it is said that the Paramatma is the source of the senses and yet without senses, it is essentially talking about the Nirguna, or the fact that the super soul is beyond the modes of material nature. So the original senses of the jiva and that of the Lord, they are fully spiritual. When they are contaminated by the modes, they become material. So the modes originate from the Lord and the senses originate from the Lord. But in the Lord, there is no mingling of the senses and the modes, because the Lord is transcendental to the modes. But in the conditioned jiva, they do commingle. So the original spiritual senses then become materially contaminated senses. So when it is said that the Lord is without senses, what it means is that the Lord is without material senses. So he is the origin of the senses, the spiritual senses. But when they get contaminated, they appear in the conditioned jiva, and Krishna's senses are not contaminated. So he is without material senses. So the essential point is that the Lord is uncontaminated by the modes, and the conditioned jiva is contaminated by the modes. So while the jiva is relying on the Lord for everything, but because they are contaminated, what the jiva displays is different from what the Lord has. So Prabhupada writes in the purport that as far as we can understand from Vedic literature, the Supreme Lord is always transcendental. Although we do not see his head, face, hands or legs, he has them. And when we are elevated to the transcendental situation, we can see the Lord's form. Right? So now Prabhupada is also talking about the ability to perceive the Lord's form. So when it is said that the Lord does not have a form, it means that he does not have a form that can be perceived by material senses. His form is fully spiritual, and it can be only perceived by the jiva when his senses have been fully spiritualized. The Prabhupada says that due to materially contaminated senses, we cannot see his form. Therefore, the impersonalists who are still materially affected cannot understand the personality of Godhead. Okay, let's go to the next verse. Okay, verse 16. Bhayaranta cha bhutanam acharam charameva cha sukshatma tad avvegam durastham chantike chatat. The Supreme Truth exists outside and inside of all living beings, the moving and the non-moving. Because he is subtle, he is beyond the power of the material senses to see or know. Although far, far away, he is also near to all. So we once again see this seemingly contradictory qualities being attributed to the Paramatma, which can be understood only by having a deeper understanding of the nature of the Paramatma. So first it is mentioned that he is Bahiyanta, that he is inside and outside. One way to understand it is that as Mahavishnu, the whole universe is within him. So he is outside everything. And as Paramatma, he is inside everything. So essentially they are all Paramatmas, but in one form he is holding the universes within him, and in another form he is within every aspect of the universe. Inside outside also means in terms of cause and effect. So just like ether is the the most subtle material elements, it is the cause of everything. So from ether, the other elements come all the way till earth. So because ether is the cause of earth, then ether is outside earth. But within earth is also ether, because the cause carries on with the effect. So it is also inside the earth. So that way ether is outside and inside. Similarly, the super soul is the cause of all the creation. So he is outside because he is the cause, and he is inside because he is in the effect. Then the third line of the verse says that he is avigyam. Avigyam means he is unknowable. Now, essentially this comes in Gayam. The Krishna is trying to describe the knowable. So it seems contradictory to say that which is knowable is unknowable. But again, the understanding over here is that the Paramatma cannot be known by the material senses. Sometimes people say that if Paramatma is in the region of the heart, then why can't we see him in the X-rays or when the surgery is done? Because the Paramatma is spiritual. So he is avigyam. He is not knowable by the material senses, but he is also gayam. He can be perceived by the Shastra Chakshu, by the eyes of the scriptures. Then he is very far away and also near. So Krishna is very, very far away for the non-devotees, but he is very close to his devotees. Also, for those who are ignorant, Krishna is very far away. And for those in knowledge, Krishna is very, very close. And finally, Charam Acharam. Acharam Acharam, in the verse, it is interpreted as that he is inside and outside, all moving and non-moving. So generally moving, non-moving are considered to be plants, which means that he is inside all forms of jivas. Acharam Charam also applies to the super soul, that he moves but he does not move. And this reflects to the potency of the Lord. That as Garbhodaksha Vishnu, he is at one place, but his influence is felt over the entire universe. When Garbhodaksha Vishnu leaves the universe, the whole universe is destroyed. Which means only because of the presence of Garbhodaksha Vishnu is the universe sustained. So, while he is Acharam, he is situated at one place, he is Charam. His influence is experienced each and every corner of the universe. Okay, so we'll stop over here and we'll continue with the discussions in the next lecture. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Hare Krishna.